I work for a small tech company and get along pretty well with my boss Dave. He's one of those guys who are easygoing and friendly, so when he invited me to go on a cruise with his family, I didn't think twice. It was going to be a 5-day trip just to get away from the daily grind. He brought along his wife Karen and his teenage son Alex. Alex was about 16, a good kid, but you know how teenagers are, quiet and always on their phone. The first few days of the cruise were amazing. The food was great, the weather was perfect, and we had a good time exploring the different stops. There was plenty to do on board: swimming pools, game rooms, shows. Alex mostly kept to himself, hanging around the pool and meeting a few other kids his age. Everything seemed perfect. Then one night things took a dark turn. I remember going to bed around midnight. My cabin was a couple of doors down from Dave's family suite. I was pretty tired after a long day in the sun, so I fell asleep quickly. The gentle rocking of the ship made it easy to drift off. At around 1:30 a.m. I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my door. Groggy and confused, I stumbled out of bed, wondering what was going on. When I opened the door, there was Dave, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. "Has Alex come back to your room?" he asked, his voice trembling. Why would he be here?" I replied, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Dave looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion. "He never came back to our room after dinner. We thought maybe he crashed here, or with one of the other teens." Immediately I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something was wrong. We both quickly got dressed and headed to the ship's customer service desk. Dave's wife Karen had already called them, but now we needed to make sure a full search was underway. They took it seriously. Of course, a teenager missing on a cruise ship, that's no joke. Within minutes they announced a search over the loudspeaker, and a team of staff started combing the decks. The ship was massive, like a floating city, so finding someone on it wasn't an easy task. We searched everywhere: the pool deck, the restaurants, the game rooms, the theaters, but there was no sign of Alex. As the hours passed, panic set in. I could see it in Dave and Karen's faces, and to be honest, I was feeling it too. This was supposed to be a fun, relaxing trip. How did it turn into a nightmare so fast? By 3 a.m. the ship's crew suggested we start checking some of the closed-off areas, the empty rooms and parts of the ship that weren't being used. It was a long shot, but at that point we were desperate. We split into groups, each of us assigned to a different part of the ship. I ended up with one of the ship's security guards, a big guy with a stern face. We started going through the empty rooms one by one. Most of them were completely dark. The lights off of the beds made it was eerie how quiet it was. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines in the background. Then, just as we were about to call it quits, we opened a door and found him. Alex was sitting on the floor, his hands tied behind his back with rope, his mouth gagged with a dirty cloth. His eyes were wide with terror. For a moment I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like something out of a horror movie. We rushed to untie him, and as soon as the gag was out of his mouth, he started crying. He was shaking and his face was pale. He told me not to say anything. Alex stammered, barely able to get the words out. He said, "If I told anyone, he'd kill my family." "Who?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Who did this to you?" Alex looked around nervously, as if the man might be standing right behind us. A man dressed in black. He grabbed me when I was walking back to the room. He dragged me in here and tied me up. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't some prank or misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately taken him and threatened him, and that someone was still on the ship. We immediately called security, and they locked down the area. They started reviewing security camera footage, trying to find any sign of the man Alex had described. Meanwhile, Dave and Karen were beside themselves with relief and terror. They couldn't believe what had just happened to their son. Then things took another unexpected twist the next morning. After hours of reviewing footage and interviewing staff, security identified a suspect. It was someone we all knew, a guy from our company. I couldn't believe it. He was just a quiet guy from the accounting department. We'd had drinks with him the night before, and he seemed completely normal, but there he was, caught on camera, lurking around the empty parts of the ship, following Alex when security brought him in. He didn't even try to deny it. He just sat there staring at the ground as they cuffed him and handed him over to the authorities. At the next port, it turned out he had some sort of grudge against Dave. He thought kidnapping Alex would scare Dave and ruin him, but he didn't count on the ship's security and the cameras catching him. Even now, months after the cruise, I still think about that night, the way the ship felt so peaceful and safe, only to turn into a place of fear and danger. And that quiet guy from accounting, someone I would have never suspected, planning something so twisted. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to set foot on a cruise ship again. The ocean may be vast, but nowhere is safe when you don't know what kind of monsters might be hiding in plain sight. My boyfriend at the time bought us 2 tickets for a getaway cruise vacation. He had just been promoted in his job, and he decided to splurge and get us first class. It was honestly one of the most luxurious experiences that I've ever had. It sounds corny, but I felt like Rose on the Titanic. The way the staff treated us, we were having a great time. We'd see live performances during the day and go dancing in one of the private clubs they had for their exclusive members during the nights. Well, one night, I believe it was the night before the ship was to head back to port in New York, me and my boyfriend decided to go to bed early. We were in our cabin suite. My boyfriend was brushing his teeth in the bathroom, and I was lying on the bed scrolling through Instagram when there was a loud knock on our door. Loud knocking. I called out to my boyfriend and asked if he ordered room service. He yelled back that he didn't. I got up from the bed and went to the door. I was about to open it, but decided to look through the peephole instead. I believe this small action was what saved our lives. As I looked through the peephole, I saw a disheveled-looking man standing in front of our door. He was breathing heavily, his eyes were wide, and there were red stains smeared all over him. I didn't quite know what to think as I stared at him. 30 seconds must have passed when he started banging on our door again, but this time much harder. Loud banging. The door handle started to jiggle as he tried to get in. I yelled for my boyfriend to get over here. Now the man was now screaming that he needs to come in and show us something. My boyfriend pushed past me and looked through the peephole. He yelled to get the fuck away from our door right now. The man did not listen. He continued to bang on our door, screaming to let him in. He was banging so hard that the edges of the door started to splinter. Terrified that he was going to break in and do God knows what to us, my boyfriend called for security from the cabin phone. We stayed pressed up against the door to prevent him from getting in. When we finally heard other voices outside, we heard security yelling at him to stop what he's doing. I thought there was going to be some big fight and the man would retaliate, but it sounded like he just listened to the security. We could hear him being detained, and we figured it was now safe to open our door. After about a half an hour of explaining to security what happened, we soon found out the grisly details of what this man was doing. Only 2 cabin doors down from us was where that man and his wife were staying. They were going to ask her some questions about her husband, but found out she had been stabbed over 40 times in the chest and neck. The man had used an ice pick that was in their cabin freezer. After he mutilated his wife, for some reason he wandered over to our cabin and was asking to come in. He had the ice pick in his hand when he was knocking, and I'm positive he would have killed me and my boyfriend if I had not looked in the peephole first. The weird thing about this whole story is I remember seeing that man in the breakfast lounge with his wife. They seemed like a normal happy couple enjoying a cruise vacation. My boyfriend later explained to me that he probably caught cabin fever and just snapped. This experience actually left such a traumatic imprint on me that I was unable to continue my relationship with my boyfriend. Sad, I know. But that's how badly it messed me up. I've since gotten better, but believe me when I say I will never step foot on a cruise ship again. My name is Alina, and I was traveling alone on a cruise to visit my family who live on a small island far away. It was meant to be a peaceful trip. I had been looking forward to this journey for weeks, imagining the cool ocean breeze and quiet days at sea, but something happened that I'll never forget, something that still makes me feel uneasy whenever I think about it. It was my second night on the cruise, and I was already feeling a little unsettled. The ship was much larger than I had expected, with long narrow hallways that seemed to stretch forever. My cabin was on the lower deck, tucked away from the busier parts of the ship. At first I liked the quiet, it gave me space to think and relax, but as the hours passed the silence became almost too heavy. The gentle rocking of the ship and the faint hum of the engine were the only sounds. The night started normally enough. I had dinner, strolled around the deck under the stars, and then returned to my cabin to get some sleep. I wasn't feeling tired yet, so I spent some time reading before finally turning off the lights. I don't know how long I had been asleep when it happened, but I suddenly woke up. The room was dark, but the dim glow from the hallway light seeped in through the edges of the door. Everything was quiet, and for a moment I thought maybe I had just woken up for no reason. Then I heard a soft knock on my door. It was so faint that I wasn't even sure I had heard it at first. I sat up in bed listening carefully. The knock came again. Gentle but clear. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Who would be knocking on my door at this hour? I glanced at the clock on the small table next to my bed. It was 3 a.m. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly got out of bed and walked to the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob as I peered through the peephole, expecting to see someone outside, but there was no one. The hallway was empty, silent except for the distant creaking of the ship. My heart began to race as I opened the door slightly just to be sure. I looked both ways down the hall, but no one was there. I stood there for a few seconds feeling uneasy. Maybe it was just a prank, I thought. Maybe someone had knocked on the wrong door by mistake. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to bed, trying to shake off the strange feeling that something wasn't right, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there in the darkness, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the soft creaks and groans of the ship. My mind kept drifting back to the knock. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then something else happened. I was lying on my side facing the wall when I felt like someone was watching me. It was an odd feeling, one I couldn't explain. My body froze, and I slowly turned my head to look around the room. That's when I saw him there, standing in the corner of my room. Was a man, or at least it looked like a man. He was tall and shadowy, his features hard to make out in the dim light, but I could see his eyes. They were dark and hollow, and they were staring directly at me. He Didn't move, didn't say a word, he just stood there watching me. My heart pounded in my chest and I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I couldn't take my eyes off him, frozen in terror. It was like my body refused to move. Finally, I gathered enough courage to leap out of bed. I didn't care about anything else. I had to get out of that room. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock before pulling it open, and running out into the hallway. I didn't stop running until I reached the lobby where a few of the crew staff were still awake. I was shaking, gasping for breath, and when I told them what had happened, they immediately sent security to check my room. I followed them back, staying a few steps behind, my heart still racing. When they opened the door, the room was empty. There was no one there. The man, the shadowy figure I had seen, was gone. The security team tried to assure me that it was probably just a dream, or maybe I had imagined it, but I knew what I had seen. I knew that man was real, or at least he had been. Later that day, one of the workers on the ship approached me. He seemed hesitant at first, like he wasn't sure if he should tell me what he knew, but eventually he spoke. He told me that the room I was staying in had a history. Years ago, a man named Hendrik had died in that very room. The details of his death were unclear, but ever since then strange things had been reported by guests who stayed in the room. Some heard knocking, others saw shadows, and a few like me had seen the man himself. As he spoke, a chill ran down my spine. It was the same room, the same corner where I had seen that figure standing. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't stay in that room any longer, so I asked to be moved to a different cabin for the rest of the trip. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. When I finally reached my family's island, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But even now, whenever I think back to that night, the memory of those hollow eyes staring at me in the darkness still sends chills through my body.